good morning, good evening, whatever time zone it is for you. Today, I am going to hopefully teach you guys about how to make a build. 'Cause honestly, a lot of this stuff is just trial and error, and most people can do it on their own. This isn't to say that it's not useful to go and look up a video, but it's more of fun in the game if you're able to critically think, how can I do this without looking it up? How can I do this with the resources that I have? And I know many of you probably don't have time for this, but it's cool information you might like to know. More power to you. It's always good to learn. I think it's always important. Now, a thing that we are going to be using, and most of you are probably looking at this, especially if you're new and you're being like, what in the heck am I looking at? Now, this is a third-party website called d2armorpicker.com. This basically goes into the API of Destiny and pulls out, what you have in your vault available to you, and you can, build a build or a set of armor that would match the stats of your pleasing. I'm just going to show you the basic rundown of this because this is so helpful when looking up how to build a build, or like what you need for a build, or if you're trying to figure something out for yourself. Having good stats or stats that benefit whatever you're trying to do will extremely help your build. And it doesn't just apply to PvE. This also applies to like PvP, because you do want high recovery stats in PvP, and if you're on Titan, you do want your resilience stat, and discipline stat is always good in PvP. A decent intellect stat if you're going for that. Mobility if you're a hunter. There's a bunch of factors that go into this that could be useful in PvP and PvE that is useful to know, and D2 Armor Picker just makes it easy and simple to do without a bunch of hassle. Now, realistically, something that you might want to do is, if you're just starting out in this building world or on Destiny, and you're trying to figure out what armors you want to masterwork or use and what's really worth your resources, like getting a strong tier 3 basic build that you could kind of use on any class that is going to be effective. Now, what is the most effective stats for any class? In PvE, you're going to want resilience and discipline. Those are the most effective stats in PvE. Resilience, because it affects how much damage you are taking within any given activity. And at max resilience, you're getting a 30% damage reduction to all incoming damage, which is super useful. And for any class, this is top tier. And even for hunters, right, your dodge is on a short cooldown, even if it's at a low tier. Like if we look here, right, it's going to show you see marksman dodge, gambler's dodge, acrobat's dodge. Even at tier 1, it's only at 36 seconds. It's the shortest class cooldown in the game, right? And at tier 100, it cuts it down by 65%, which can be big. And if you have the stat resources to do it, then do it. But if you're new, I would say that mobility is not completely necessary unless you're depending on your barely noticeable increases to speed, walking speed, strafe speed, crouch speed. For 99% of the game, this isn't going to matter. Neither will the cooldown on your dodge. Plus, most of the 3.0 classes have ways to mitigate or shorten this timer without using stats at all. Resilience is number 1. I'd say number 2 is discipline, and discipline because discipline is tied to your nade. And nades generally have the longest cooldown of all the cooldowns. You could see at tier 1 discipline, you are looking at pretty high numbers for all the nades. So if you get it to tier 10, which is 100, right, you're looking at a significant cooldown, which is 69%. Nice. But 69% cooldown on all your nades, which is useful. And the only reason I don't say strength, it is a pretty significant cooldown. Unless you're going for a strength build, most of the time you're not meleeing stuff in Destiny, unless it's a strength build of some sort. But again, the same thing with mobility. There's a lot of things in the game that can mitigate this cooldown, and the same things with discipline. Like, there's so many things in the game that can mitigate the cooldown that realistically stats don't really matter, but it's still important. Like, you get a pretty huge, like, it's still 69%. So at tier 10 on both of these is going to be 69%. So you just had to evaluate which one is more important to you. But I would say discipline is very, very important. And especially for PvP, discipline is hugely important because grenades generally have a lot more impact than most of the melees in PvP. Now, there's one more stat to look at for PvP, or if you're the warlocks, and that is recovery. Now, why recovery? Because recovery is the stat that dictates how fast you regen your health. In PvP, this is huge because you can get shot at, go hide behind cover, and it'll be sooner that you can rejoin the fight and be at full health. And another reason is for warlocks, see that you get a rift cooldown, and your rift is tied to your recovery stat. The lower the tier, the longer the cooldown. I mean, it's not that big of a difference. It's a 65%. I mean, that is a pretty big difference. But some of you might look at this and be like, well, it's only a 33% difference from tier 0 for regeneration time. But 33% in PvP and the fast pace of it all, 33% is a decent chunk. So we've kind of gone over what the stats are for. Now, getting a ×3 tier 10 build, you're going to need some good armor. Apparently, I can make 4 different sets of armor with 4 different tier 10 stats, and these are showing what stats they're going to be. So like I get a mobility, resilience, and discipline, mobility, recovery, discipline, resilience, recovery, discipline, and resilience, discipline, intellect. Now, I did not know I had this intellect one, so we'll click on it. Now, I have apparently a ton of different armor that I could incorporate into this and get crazy stats. The only thing is I really wouldn't want to get an intellect build unless I'm trying to spam bubbles and crucible or something like that. But you get the point. Like, getting a decent set with 3 stats being tier 10, it makes it really easy to slot in an exotic piece. Now, we will go to one that I know. I have the one build that I know that I can incorporate exotics into is this one. So I have 3 stats that are maxed. I have a stasis build that is built around Cadmus Ridge. I know this will work because I have it on. No, it says it won't work, but the reason for that is because we added some fragments that increased our stat pool. And now we have a bunch of builds that have what I'm looking for. Now we can go into the game and look at this. So you can see I have all my stats maxed. Well, those ones maxed. And I'm on Behemoth. And the crazy thing is I could probably slot this in. And look, I have realistically the same stats. And the only reason I was able to do this was because I made sure that I had a decent set of armor that incorporated the stats that I use the most on my Titan, that I could easily just slot in this. Or if I wanted to, do I have it on here? No, but maybe I could slot this in. This is a really bad Heart of a Most Light, but it's the only one I have, the only one I've ever gotten. So we could swap in this. Wow, look, we still have max stats. We even have more stats than what we did before. I could even probably, I think that one would kill it. Yeah, that one would kill it. I almost have it with this, even with this really bad Actium Warwick, or that with that bad Curses of the Falling Star. But you get the idea. Having a good 3-stat tier 10 build of just legendary armor will lower the time to create builds or add builds. Unless it's a very specific build you're going for, then you might need to go get armor. And how would you do that? There are many options to get armor. Now, the best armor in the game would be from things like Grasp of Avarice, or Duality, or Spire of the Watcher, or Ghost of the Deep. Now you only get this armor from doing the master version of these activities. But just so you know, there is a big bug on Master Ghosts of the Deep. If you get a checkpoint for the last boss and look up a video on how to cheese the boss, you can get Artifice armor pretty easily. So just note that it does take a while if you're doing it on anything other than Warlocks, but it is possible and you don't actually have to do the activity. What are some other methods if you don't want to go and try to farm or Artifice armor? Because other than Ghosts of the Deep, the other dungeons are on a weekly rotator, so you can only get them at certain points when they are the featured dungeon of the week, like Spire of the Watcher is. So this would be the only dungeon where you could go and farm Artifice armor from outside of the newest dungeon. And next week this is going to rotate, so next week there won't even be a dungeon that is farmable for Artifice armor, because next week will be Shattered Throne, which does not have Artifice armor. So you'd have to wait 4 weeks before you could farm Artifice armor again from a master dungeon. Now, there is one place where you can get armor that is pretty comparable to Artifice armor, and that would be from the Pit of Heresy. Now, why do I say the Pit of Heresy? The Pit of Heresy gives super high spiked armor from the final encounter, and it's guaranteed spiked armor. And what do I mean by spiked armor? This is what I mean by spiked armor. You can see that it might not be the highest roll, but it has really high spikes, and spikes are like see how it has 22 mobility and 23 intellect? That is pretty high spike. And I did this 2 times in a row a couple weeks back, and I got 2 pieces of armor that have really high spikes. It's guaranteed. So, you know, I got 26 recovery and 26 strength on this. If you're really looking for one stat that needs to be really high, you could just throw a ghost mod onto whatever stat you want, and this ghost mod is a guarantee of a plus 10 in whatever stat you put on your ghost. Now, that doesn't mean like that spike is going to be in that column, but it is increasing the chances that the spike will be in that column, if that makes sense. So where else can you get good high stat armor? If you go to the helm, you can get armor from here at the war table. So you have engrams. I could decode. I'll decode something just to show you. Let's do a chest piece. Wow, look at that armor. It is absolutely trash. As a Titan, you don't want any mobility. You can also get armor from the new season too at this location in the helm. Remember, it costs 2 engrams, so you know you might have to save up for a while to get these, but this is basically a way to get high stat armor without doing anything. Now, there is one more place that you can get high stat armor, but it is more difficult than all the other options because it is master raids. So if you say you load it up on the master raid, now it does not seem to show you what stat it is for the week, but the way master raids work is it's gonna, every encounter is gonna give you, unfortunately, right, the only thing you can get for master raids is armor, unless you're doing the challenge. So realistically, you have to go and look up what the stat is for the week. Do you want that stat? Like, don't do this. Don't give in to Bungie's weird design for master raids, because this is a poor excuse at rewards for master raids, because the armor's not better than our artifice armor, and it's way harder to get because you have to get 6 people together to go do some of the harder content in the game, and it's not even a guarantee that it will be good armor. I think the stat that it drops for will be like a 20, but that's not guaranteed that you'll get it in the other stats that you want. I would not give in and do this. Other raids that include master are Vow of the Disciple. Now you have to wait till the week of Vow of the Disciple being the featured weekly raid for you to even do master. Now, the only reason I would say that you could theoretically do this and it'd actually be good is if King's Fall, Vault of Glass, Vow of the Disciple are the weekly featured raids, because you could do challenges as well while you're doing it. If your team is trying to farm it, then you could be getting adept loot and high stat armor. Now, the only one that I would say is kind of worth it would be Vault of Glass, because the adept weapons are actually pretty good and they're not craftable. So you know, it could be worth doing it, but I would say Vault of Glass is probably one of the harder ones to do the challenges for, other than Exhibition and Vow of the Disciple. Take that with a grain of salt. And again, like I said, realistically, for most people, doing those is just a waste of time. I wouldn't even bother with them unless you have a team that can go and run master raids and try to farm these armors. But if that's you, you probably don't need this information. So how would I make a build? That's really why we're here. We talked about armor for so long because armor is important in the making of builds. So is weapons. But honestly, at the point Destiny is in, weapons are kind of a lesser thing unless the weapon is insane. Your abilities and armor is more important than your guns. Let's say I was going to build this build again. How would I start by looking at it? Well, I'd be, oh shoot, I want to use this Cadmus Ridge Lance Cap. Now, what does it do? Diamond Lances create stasis crystals on impact when thrown, with more crystals created by hitting bosses and vehicles while using a stasis subclass, and behind your rally barricade, rapid precision hits and combatant final blows with a stasis weapon creates a diamond lance near you. Now, that's a lot of specifics, but the requirements are that I have on rally barricade, I need to be behind it and be using it and have a stasis weapon on. Now I could put on a stasis heavy. I don't have one on me, but you get the point. Like, I need to have at least one stasis weapon for this to have any effect at all. And then everything from there is kind of up to the builder, realistically. This is all about creating diamond lances. So how would I create diamond lances? You will need the diamond lance aspect, which is what most people run for Behemoth Titan, because it has 3 fragment slots. None of the other ones give 3 fragment slots. It is probably one of the more useful ones to just have on, even if you don't use it, if you're just using stasis. So you get the benefits of having 3 extra aspect slots. Now I have Tectonic Harvest on. This isn't necessary, but I like to have the stasis crystals. I've actually thought about changing it up to like Howl of the Storm to be able to create more stasis crystals, but it's not completely necessary. So Glacier Grenade is so good for Titans, so I have it on. I have these 2 aspects, Tectonic Harvest and Diamond Lance. I also have Whisper of Rending, primary ammo weapons do increased damage to stasis crystals and frozen targets. This is just to make sure that if I throw my Glacier Grenade or throw the lance and it creates stasis crystals, that I am able to actually break them and do a bunch of damage. And while you are near frozen targets or friendly stasis crystals, you take reduced damage from targets. This is very useful, means we have no method of actually recovering health within our subclass. Having access to this will make it easier for us to stay alive in combat, especially in higher tier content. And then Whisper of Shards, shattering a stasis crystal temporarily boosts your grenade recharge rate. Shattering additional stasis crystals increases the duration of this benefit. This is a huge fragment and it's not to be overlooked. If you have Glacier Grenade on, you should probably be using this because it does boost your grenade recharge rate by quite a bit. And then this is just to make sure that if I am creating stasis shards, that I am actually getting them, because they track to my position. From Whisper of Conduction, and then I have Whisper of Fissures, increase the damage and size of the burst of stasis when you destroy stasis crystals or defeat a frozen target. Now this is useful because remember, my diamond lances are going to be creating stasis crystals. I have grenades that create stasis crystals. I have my super, which creates stasis crystals. And for those that didn't know, Behemoth is one of the highest damaging supers in the game. So having the increase to the shatter is huge. Realistically, the build is just this and Behemoth and a stasis weapon, or stasis weapons if you have a heavy. So that's kind of the thought process of this. I kind of built it around this exotic, picking something specific that I wanted to do and then building around it. And most of the building was done in the subclass, which you can do with most things. Now I could add something like Verglass Curve to the mix, which creates its own stasis crystals. This thing was actually pretty good in this build, but I will say that Verglass Curve is pretty finicky, being that it's, I think, considered a lightweight bow, so there's some accuracy issues and it's just being kind of finicky overall. And then the reason why I was using the sword is because this sword in particular has a specific heavy attack, launch a heavy slam attack, and basically you could launch a heavy slam attack behind the safety of your crystal wall of your grenade or your diamond lance, and then you'd shatter all the crystals and do the sword damage on top of it. It's pretty hectic to try to get out of it, I will say, but like, it's cool. And so basically that is the thought process of like how you would go through and build a build. You know, you could use the same logic with anything. Again, the basic idea is to pick something specific and then build around it. And you could find some little cool intricacies of how things interact with other things, like the sword with the stasis crystals, and upgrade said build to do interesting things or cool things that are fun. And that's the point of this video, is to kind of give you a quick rundown on how you could potentially build a build yourself. And again, this isn't saying that you shouldn't go and look up videos for builds or meta builds or take advice from other people. If you don't have time to make builds, then, you know, more power to you. You can do whatever you want. But I will say there's a huge portion of this game that is missed out on if you don't take it into your own hands to try to design something yourself. And you'll find sometimes things don't work out. Sometimes some builds are just off, but sometimes you find that sweet spot of a build like this, the stasis one I showed you. Like, I haven't really heard anybody talk about it, but I think this is a super strong build. If the artifact mods weren't favoring every other class other than stasis, or subclass other than stasis, I would use this for like grandmasters and stuff. I think I did last season. It was super effective, but obviously not the sword. I had something else. The point being is that you might find something cool that nobody else is thinking of, or maybe they thought of, but it's not getting the attention that maybe it deserves, right? Because it's not the complete meta broken crap that's out this season, but it is a build that you could take into the future because it's flying under the radar and it probably won't be looked at for a long time. But realistically, this video is just to encourage you guys to go out and build and learn the intricacies of the game so that you might become better players, because the more you build like certain subclasses and builds, you will become better at the game because you actually know what you're using and how you're supposed to use it, rather than just looking up a video and then you're like, why doesn't this work for me? It works for them, you know? But to encourage you to grow as a player and to take things into your own hands and be able to enjoy the depth of the game that Destiny actually has, right? You'd be surprised, right? Because there's not just PvE builds, there's PvP builds that are super good, and it just takes sometimes you to really focus in on one aspect of something and really draw it out to its fullest conclusion so that, you know, you could see something cool come out of an idea that you thought of, or you could see it miserably fail. But that's part of the process, right? You're never going to learn if something's good or not unless you fail. So if you stuck around this long, I want to thank you. And if you enjoy the content, I want to also thank you, and make sure you hit that subscribe and like and comment down below anything else you'd like to see, and I bid you guys adieu.